Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Regenesis, New Humanity, New Earth, New Paradigm, New Design, all followed by question marks because we're inquiring about what's really new. Many of us know we're in this time of change and transformation right now. But I like to speak with people to get their perspectives and also see the work that they're doing as we kind of architect the new dawn or the new paradigm or a new way of being here on the earth. So I want to welcome our guest today, who I've gotten to know just recently, but feels like we've known each other for a long time and actually have mutual perceptions and perspectives and verbiage on many things. So I want to welcome Mr. Steve Haggart, calling in from Australia today. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here. Thank you for the call.
So I just want to give props to Maureen Edwardson from Inner Resonance Technology. She does a lot of incredible work about helping people to become more coherent, more able to comprehend what's actually being communicated, which hopefully assists in the process of collaboration and co-creation. So I want to acknowledge her. I know she's in Australia right now, somewhere in the outback, doing her inner resonance technology work. But what was fascinating when I was introduced to you, there was a mention of Dom and her. So for people who might watch this broadcast, can you just tell us a little bit maybe about yourself and some of the work you've done and really how you, let's start with how you ended up at Dom and Her, which of course is a world-renowned place in Italy that has many elements to it.
Brief description about self then would be born in England to an English father, Danish mother, spent all of the holidays in Denmark, schooling in England, moved to Australia at 23, I think it was. Initially trained as an architect, did pretty well at different design competitions, but then saw those designs and concepts go wayward because of more the technocrats getting involved, I'd say. So particularly the money people, when you'd find that corners were getting cut, but getting cut in arguably the wrong way. So I became very interested in both the commercial composition as much as the aesthetic composition of things. And so looking at the full life cycle and stream of people involved in a thing, and how do you actually try and find the win-win in all of that for all of them, from the people who are creating it to the people who use it to the people who end up owning it. And it occurred to me at the time, particularly, that it was all very much compartmentalized and designed to be, serve the people who created it and not really the people who were going to own it or occupy it in the end. So came this whole concept of looking at, and I don't want to draw analogies with Microsoft and Apple, but it was quite analogous at the time, that I was moving away from the PC because every time something went wrong, then the hardware people would blame the software people, would blame the operating system, would blame somebody, but it was always somebody else's problem. Whereas moving to Apple, it was kind of all under one roof, and not that Apple's perfect, but it just was this more cohesive idea of creating the operating system, the hardware to run it on, the place that you might be in, for example, and having all of the suite of support things that came with it. So there was a sort of an interest in that more holistic approach to effectively property development, because architecture is in service to that as a piece of it, but then to become the developer in the driving seat of it all is to be you know, a few more steps closer to being able to balance all of the balls. And so this commercial composition and aesthetic composition became a very central theme, as did then looking at all the technologies of materials in the first place, in the first instance, to look at how to use better materials, materials that could do different things, have multiple purposes, how larger scale projects could afford to do more fancy tri-generation swapping of energy, moving of energy around, um, dealing with waste and so on. So it sort of evolved out of property development, very much into technologies to go with places, and it became more about creating places to optimize the experience that people were going to have in those places than it became about the just creating a place for the sake of a place and trying to create a place that had a few more bells and whistles than the last place to be a bit different then and sell more of. It was very much more grounded in why do people do what people do? And I think another influencing factor in all of that was um, falling in love at 15 at a very young age with an older woman who took me through a very deep process, which when that process kind of seemingly evaporated 4 years later, the question remained, what just happened there? How could, there have been something that was so profound and deep in one moment, and then apparently it's not there the next, which took me into my head and then started this very analytical process of not any kind of training in psychology, but really wanting to understand why do people do what people do? Why do they feel what they feel, and why do they think and say what and do what they do? And how could you support them in optimizing their interactions with the people around them and their surroundings? And so that's in terms of the places that I was then looking and interested in creating. It was really based on those sort of ideas. Why do people do what they do? How could they do it better? And so started this deep dive into what became known as the Co-Creative Hub Network, which was very much about optimizing people to help realize themselves, understanding the benefit to the collective consciousness as each individual comes online. So it's, this whole notion and the 30-year exploration of this idea between what is serving in service to self, what is in service to others, and where do you find the sweet spot between the two?
And it's very interesting, not to interrupt, because hearing you talk, you come from a very technically specific background, doing anything around architecture, design, engineering, working with Apple computers. And then as you're speaking, I'm sensing this undertone of, well, I don't want to do business as usual. There's some undercurrent or something that's also communicating with you or through you or moving you through these experiences, very much like you even saying about your relationship. I've never mentioned to you, but I'm actually an interfaith minister and did a 2.5 year seminary program and have spent different times in different types of philosophical, intellectual, spiritual communities, religious communities. And I think one of the things that is fascinating, which ties into our whole topic today of Regenesis, and we can dig into what that word, everyone has a slightly different meaning. And just to be up to par, I watched a film on Genesis the other day, but there is kind of this midwifing of all of us as sovereign individuals, but also on a collective global level, that we're moving into something different. I mean, for some people right now, they're going through a lot of suffering and a lot of pain. And then other people are going through what they're calling like these miraculous awakenings or epiphanies that they're having to gain deeper insight to their life. But I will say this, through all of that, I think there's really no rule of thumb that's kind of universal for everyone of how that happens, but also that the one thing we can count on is consistent is change.
Mm.
And sometimes, like I said, midwifing can be painful. If we look at like the birthing process, sometimes afterwards we can have um, trauma or even stretch marks, those types of things. But I just wanted to acknowledge, because in our conversations, I've come to sense the brilliance of the work that you have been doing, and then as all of us were going through this transformational process, and this is tied into a lot of prophecies and teachings of world cultures right now. But also, and I looked at some of the stuff we'd communicate about being visioneers, architecting the new paradigm. And I think this is one of the things that you and I really connected and heavily related to, that we are through envisioning, through co-creation and collaborating with a larger field of perceptivity and awareness, and hopefully compassion, that there is a lot going on right now. And to give it back to you, I really was compelled and intrigued what you said about visionaries and architecting, and then not just as a concept, but you actually were involved on some level with the Domenher project. So to go back to you, if you could explain kind of, how did you go from all of that into, I mean, if people aren't familiar, if you go to Domenher, it's like the temple of humanity. And I mean, what's happening there, just the eye candy and the visual element alone is kind of legacy level, but I know there's many layers to it. But again, going back to your story and how you, or what you did connecting with this kind of global legacy level project.
Yeah, and well, so then I guess what emerged out of the different explorations into technology systems, physical networks of places, digital networks, uh, to connect the world globally. Then through all of that, there were two common themes that started to emerge. The first one, at the core of it all, was that these were all things that I was drawn to that were supporting the evolution of consciousness on the planet. And so that's what I sort of distilled it down to when I was, when I talk about 50 things in a global visionary network, then many things have come and gone out of that 50, and it's remained around 50 for probably 5 years now. And even in the last 5 years, then certain of those 50 would have come and gone as well, but the core remains the same. And the core determinant, I guess, that brought them all together was this notion of supporting the evolution of consciousness on the planet. But then the very second thing that is common to them all is that they've been starved of the resources to be able to realize them. So although we managed to sort of put everything into 4 cluster groups of activities, a 5th one was added, which was the resourcing of them all. And it was apparent that each of the 50 were all independently looking to source the resources to help realize themselves. And they're basically all looking at different strategies to extract resources out of the old to serve the new. And so that was a major thrust, was the economics of it all. How do you actually, so coming back to Demonher, then Demonher is a guy, Falco, who created it 50 years ago now, reportedly came back from 2,600 years in the future to incarnate in 1950 to start a splinter group of humanity. And so then you've got a community that's now 50 years on, that is definitely living a different lifestyle and approach to, I mean, more like the Essenes. I mean, I'm sure your audience will be familiar with the Essenes, but it feels more like an Essene kind of culture that is in that spiritual, mystical school. The Essenes had to very much keep to themselves and keep completely out of the way for threat of persecution. Davenhurst had to play more of a front and center role, in being who and what it actually is, but in also having to define itself in normal old paradigm terms. What kind of tax structure are we under? What kind of entity should we be called? How do we legally define ourselves and so on? So how do we run a payroll? How do we generate income to be able to support the things that we want to do? So they're coming from a place of aspiring to abundance, as we all are, of living a different lifestyle altogether. I mean, I can see that you're showing some stuff now that
Yeah,
is very,
as you're talking, I'm just going to show a little bit of some imagery and stuff from Dom and her. So
yeah,
please continue. Thank you.
yeah, no worries. And so, art and culture is a big piece. And I mean, coming back to the Co-Creative Hub just for 1 second, the sort of 4 cluster groups that we ended up with there were art and culture to honor all of the social and cultural aspects of humanity, the environment being both the built environment and the natural environment, sciences being both technical sciences, technology, and original sciences, chemistry, biology, and so on. And then we had another group called structures in society, which is all decision making and the exchange of value and so on. So, I think to try and get a fully balanced,
Which is nice. Not to interrupt, Steve, but you kind of I'm showing it right now. You kind of simplified the wheel of co-creation, like you said, into these hubs or areas or silos of different types of topics that people might have interests or skill sets in. Correct?
yeah, but it's also trying to get the broadest collection of human activity together in one place, because it was not about trying to police the creative process, but to try and put people in a broader context to what they were doing. So if you have a technobuff off on his own somewhere or her own in the middle of nowhere with no capacity to interact with other facets of humanity, then they may well just come up with something that they think is great, but may undermine all sorts of other aspects of humanity. So trying to actually bring people together in community and give them context was a key aspiration anyway, to trying not to police anything, but just to provide better outcomes from broader inputs. So Dam and Hare expresses this in a very deep and profound way, because they're very much about art and culture as the foundational piece of their existence, really, and the expression of their spirituality in art and culture. So, and having fun. I can just see some of the images that are scrolling through. But as with any of these communities, they were birthed 50 years ago in a different era. They've been birthed in a very interesting part of the world in Italy because of the Catholic Church and because of the mafia. Because the Damanhurian philosophy is very much about exploring all wisdom traditions that have ever been, are, will be in any place on Earth and off planet. So, they're very much all inclusive, and all of the artwork is kind of androgynous in a sense that it's neutral in terms of its geniality, and they each take on both an animal name and a plant name to acknowledge the other species on the planet. So, it doesn't start and stop with humanity. Humanity's another species here living with all the rest, supported by Mother Earth, nature, however you want to put it, but the holding environment that supports all life, including her own. So, it's when we're considering things, then it's not just from a human-centric perspective, or even the animals and plants, it's a holistic systems perspective. So, trying to move beyond this myopic fixation with money as the only means of valuing anything, then I think we're off to hell in a basket case if that's the only measure of value. So expanding those values to include custom and culture and health and well-being and environment and knowledge and wisdom, as well as technology, as well as as well as nature and as well as money. But until we get to several measures of value beyond one, then it feels like that's the place that we need to move to, and that's the emerging paradigm, is the move away from man-made pyramidical, hierarchical systems and structures that are man-made to more nature-based, decentralized, autonomous systems. And so to expand your awareness and the values that you focus on, to move beyond one measure of value to those other measures, and it doesn't have to be the measures that I mentioned, but certainly to have several measures of value rather than one. And Damanhur has exemplified that in it's incredible the amount of work that they do. But again, they're an organization or a group of people who are trying to exist in an old paradigm and bringing forward new ideas and new approaches. But still having to survive. And so the reason I ended up in Damanhur was after a 5-year conversation with Damanhur about their economy, simply because COVID had come through, and all of the ways that they were generating any kind of income to support the temple maintenance and their ongoing spiritual inquiry was through people visiting Damanhur and doing courses there, visiting the temples and so on. So all of the interactive ways that they were able to generate income before all vanished during COVID. And so, but they're still left with the costs. So, the costs of running a community of a couple of thousand people, of maintaining temples and courses and spiritual activities and work and food and da 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 da. So, they had large costs and no income all of a sudden. And so last year was really to go and try and help understand what had gone on and how to improve it. I think you
So
might be muted.
just as a question, um, because I know there's a lot of amazing, eco resorts and projects around the world. We have also other places like Findhorn and Oroville in India and Arcosanti and Arizona. But for me, it's fascinating, when people try to look at these kind of utopian expressions of community and the futurism. But for me, a lot of times there tends to be, and I'm not totally up to par on exactly every element of Damanhur, but what was their relationship? Because for me, the whole idea of self-sustainability, of regenerative design, where we don't have to count on the arrival of these, fiat or petrol dollars showing up. What were they doing as far as um, severing some of their dependency on the financial system?
Um, Well, as I say, the main incomes were really coming from them running spiritual courses, but running them on site in Damanhur. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the synchronic lines, but Falco, before Damanhur was founded, um, recognized that there were energy lines that ran through and across the earth, and he had a different view to ley lines and magnetic lines. His concept was called um, these synchronic lines, which are kind of squiggly lines more than straight lines. And there's about 8 of them that go north-south, about 8 that go east-west. But because they're squiggly, then they don't all just cross naturally in 2 places. Some cross in 3 places, and there are 2 points on the planet where 4 lines cross. Damanhur is one of them, and Laos, where the Dalai Lama's original palace was in Tibet, was the other one. So Damanhur was founded very strategically on the confluence of 4 of these synchronic lines, with the intention of creating temples in the mountains that would, through the collective activity of the community of a couple of thousand people, resonate a certain spiritual frequency through the temples and then out through the synchronic lines and around the earth.
And I have to say, I work with Peter Champeau, who's the author of Gaia Matrix and has books about power spots and ley lines and meridians and what we call also dragon lines that are squiggly. But I bring this up because I'm very spiritually centric in the work that I do, but I find it very challenging sometimes of when I have to draw a line in the sand of like, am I commercializing or kind of pimping spirituality to make money? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people getting paid for healing or insight. I used to have a holistic lifestyle coaching practice. But there's this interesting line of like, and even here in Crestone, we have the Naropa, the Blazing Mountain Center from Chogyam Trungpa, whose big teachings was about spiritual materialism. So it's interesting because I do find, and I'm not saying this in judgment or decision, but a lot of people now, like everyone's selling a ceremony, everyone's selling this or selling that, or buy the crystal. This crystal will bring you enlightenment. And for me, it's sometimes an interesting disconnect between spirituality and then just having our feet on the ground and doing practical things that are sustainable, like regenerative agriculture, planting a garden, harvesting rainwater, even into how that extends into areas of what we call social permaculture. Like, how do we all collaborate and work together, with different strengths and different weaknesses. And then, as we know, it can be an exhausting quandary because different people are at different places of their evolution. And I say that as a wheel, not as a pyramid or a hierarchy or higher and lower. We're all incarnate, we're all here in the school of life on the University of Earth, doing our journey. But it's interesting to me, where, and I will say this for myself, I've had to really make kind of a deeply innovative approach to how do I maintain my spirituality? How do I offer that compassionately, kind of as a bodhisattva in service to the world? I'm not just on the mountain saying, I'm fine, like screw the world. I'm just going to be here in peace and everyone can figure it out, but trying to contribute something valuable to the human condition. But at the same time, where for me, it's like some things are, and again, this is my own personal choice, I'm just sharing it. Some things are sacred and maybe not everything should have a price tag on it and be for sale. It's kind of like that Bob Dylan line where, we live in a time where we have toy guns and spark and flesh colored Christ that glow in the dark and it's easy to see without looking too far. That is anything really sacred, or is it all for sale? So I'm just saying that because it parlays into another aspect of a discussion, a dimension of our conversation in the past and possibly in the future about building specific centers, but having the foundation be about being regenerative, being self-sustainable, and figuring it out before you get yourself into, like, how do we maintain these golden temples and feet? I mean, unless someone's going to appear and like Sai Baba and turn from the ethers, turn it into loaves and fishes and feed millions of people and precipitate cosmic prana, and everyone will somehow spiritually be nourished. It is, for me, it's a quandary. And I think as a spiritual being that I've had to kind of rebirth, remidwife, regenesis my own perspectives and philosophies to feel like, well, I'm also here on the earth, the University of Earth, and I have to find a way that, like our ancestors till a few hundred years ago, they didn't have money really. They might have bartered or traded, they had energy equity, but how did they survive and live and thrive without being kind of enslaved into this fiat dollar petroleum based money matrix that keep people really oppressed and suppressed? And not that I'm anti-money, I'm just saying as far as energy equity, monetization, and now we have the central bank proposing a global central bank digital currency with social credit systems. So again, control, these types of things. What's some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to finish off on the Damanhur thing, I think the reason, and it's almost like Sai Baba did come down from the mount and support the resourcing of the temples in the first instance, and so we explored the how to invoke abundance in which evolved from material abundance into other kinds of abundance. So the Damanhurians are not at all focused on the money, and that's kind of where they've fallen foul of the existing systems, because there's plenty of people that want to make them conform to the existing systems, and so they're constantly having to not battle that, but work with that, whilst maintaining their own spiritual experience. And when you mention, is everything for sale, then I think the point where uh, the rubber hits the road for me would be if you've got a daily practice and you're doing something on a daily basis and having ceremony every day, and that's your primary focus, and the rest of it is, um, you might sell a trinket, or you might sell a jewel or a diamond or whatever, a crystal or whatever. But I mean, that's not where they're coming from at all. I mean, they're entirely focused on maintaining a level of consciousness and resonance and frequency in a series of temples that they genuinely believe are radiating that same frequency out across the planet. And they're about going to every crossing point on that synchronic line system and activating the earth energies through spirals in every location around the earth, of which there are hundreds. So, and they've been at this for 30, 40 years now. So that's their mission, and what they actually gain in terms of an income is a pittance by comparison to the costs that they have to try and bear, and literally everybody gives everything to the higher mission, so to speak. So no, everybody's living a very frugal life. It's all very much based on sustainability and growing their own food and harvesting their own water. So it's those fundamental basics are not just a concept as for regenesis or sustainability. They're a need from an economic perspective of they can't afford to do anything any other way, because every cent that they generate is going into a list as long as your arm of things that they want to try and achieve in the world, and the temples and maintaining them is just a basic part of that. And so what we're trying to do in talking about their economy was saying, well, what are the basic costs that you need to cover for what you've already got, versus what is the cost of all of the stuff that you've got on your shopping list of things you'd love to do in the world. Because if we get another COVID happen and all of the income stops again, then how do you maintain what you've already got and keep that going if that's a foundational piece to keeping the spiritual mission of Damanhur intact? And so that's what they'll protect at all costs, come what may, beyond all else. And it's not about the money, it's about maintaining the integrity of the frequency that's coming through those temples and radiating out into the world. But if we then talk about the fiat dollar and everything else, I mean, for me, it's very curious to look at America as a relatively insular country with an insular focus. And, if we talk about the BRICS nations just for a second, the
Mm-hmm.
BRICS nations, as most people would be aware, started off with India, China, Brazil, South Africa,
Russia.
Russia. So, just Russia, China, and India represent the bulk of the population on the planet and the bulk of the resources and output of things. I know the US economy up until recently was equal to and greater than all of them put together. But then, now they've added Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Argentina, and others. So now 80% of the global supply of oil and gas is contained within the BRICS nations, who are now all trading with their own currencies between each other and not using the petrochemical dollar anymore. So the petrochemical dollar doesn't exist. I mean, in my view, obviously it does, and it's been propped up by the stock market in New York. But on a global scale, if you've got 80% of the resource that that dollar was built off now being traded in other currencies, 80% of what it was built off now being traded in other currencies, then there's not really much left for the US dollar to, petrochemical dollar anyway, to have anything of a foundation. So the idea that all of the currencies are going to gold-backed currencies, going back to not just gold-backed, but I think the concept of backing anything with reality rather than consensus is the only way that we can move forward in the world. And I mean, even the fiat dollar experts would agree that it was an experiment that had a lifespan of 60 years, which is now long past. And so as a concept of exchange, it was flawed beyond a certain point, which we've long since reached. So, the idea of going back to minerals, even, if you look at any given country and you think about the technologies that they have, the innovation that they illustrate, the workforce they've got to hand, as much as the minerals they've got in the ground, as much as whatever they've got in the bank. I mean, Dr. David Martin, another good friend of mine, talks about the ridiculousness of destroying a mountain to dig up a bunch of gold stuff to then take it halfway around the world and process it into bars and stick it in another hole in the ground somewhere else. Having, as he puts it, it's only through man's efforts that something is given value. The fact that it's got value in the ground as a thing before you have to then take down the mountain to remove it is just a very curious discussion piece, because now chalking of minerals in the ground, you can value stuff in the ground before you even pull it out.
Well, it's interesting when we had our it started out as a resilience hub because of the wildfires and because of the level of water toxicity in California, and because of just a whole cascading list of reasons why we talked about community resilience really as a emergency response to how many catastrophes were happening, and also dealing with the human aspect of the amount of trauma. I mean, the Paradise Fire, the fires at Lake Tahoe, again, it goes on and on, the Oroville Dam spillway collapse, crumbling infrastructure. But it soon, after we launched that, it became the regenerative hub. It's really interesting because one of the people we brought in was doing a lot of research about how actually gold is even more valuable if you leave it in the ground, because of the effects on the environment, because of the amount of remediation that needs to be done. And even though there are companies out there who try to do conscious mining and extraction with less impact, primarily it's an industry that's based on profit over people, and really the bottom line of stockholders per se. And when luckily recently we just defeated the reopening of a mine in Nevada County, California by Rise Gold, who had a history of corruption and broken promises and poisoning communities. But the point is that his work was really focused on how gold is more valuable in the ground, and there's ways with like LIDAR and ground penetrating technologies to assess, like, okay, this bioregion has this resource, it's assessed at that, and how can that be translated potentially into like an equity ledger, or a way that could be kind of monetized as a resource. So I want to switch gears just for a second, because I know you work with some different organizations. We've spoke a little bit about the evolution of consciousness, and also about co-creation. I showed very briefly at least Barbara Marx Hubbard's interpretation of the wheel of co-creation, which I've adopted in some ways, but I call it the wheel of full spectrum design. And how spirituality, arts, culture, health, media, energy, infrastructure, agriculture, media, governance, sovereignty, economics, that unless these all kind of, and even in a model, like people maybe in like a dominant or in a community, in a watershed, in a bioregion, that these are the elements we have to look at. We can't just kind of look at one little piece of this big design or puzzle and think that we actually see the whole thing. So, would you love to share with us a little bit about some of the organizations that you're working with? Because I've come to understand and to perceive and see that, you know, beyond the work that you've done in the past, that you're actually um, still doing a lot right now. And of course, the jury's still out. There's a litmus test going on of the real progress of the human condition and how successfully can we deploy some of these solutions. Actually, someone gave me a new word a few months ago. They said I was an apocalyptimist, that even though things seem to be falling apart, which in many ways they are, the old paradigm, the old structures, the patriarchy, the colonial Eurocentric mindset, especially relating to indigenous people in the Americas, that I still feel fairly optimistic. And I'm optimistic because I changed from being more of a people person and working more bioregionally to opening up the lens of my perception. And basically my mantra is like, I need to find the lions who have the solutions and the vision and the insight to actually they are, and we can continue to arc out and envision what this new paradigm, this new earth, new humanity will look like. And a lot of that does go into the fields of self-sustainability and the green movement, green economy, sustainable. I mean, saying sustainable and development in the same sentence is kind of a paradoxical oxymoron. But looking at these types of things, and since then, meeting people like yourself and others that are doing incredible. I mean, I had an interview with Kevin Fetz yesterday, who is doing amazing work about not just recycling waste, but green waste and doing remediation and offering solutions to towns and cities and governments that are completely unaware that they're poisoning their food, their watershed, their water table, the children, the playgrounds, the golf courses. Again, part of the regenesis, let's say, or the regenesis, is we just have to stop being so stupid and so disconnected and so greedy. And we have to start to bring in some of the visionary people and the solutionaries who maybe they haven't spent their life running for a political position to be in a place of power, to be a decision maker. But like you were kind of saying before about co-creation, collaboration. So if you could just share a little bit about maybe some of the organizations you're connected to, and how do you see this time? Like, how can we implement more of designing and architecting out this new way of being, this new paradigm?
Well, yeah, and I can certainly do that, and I will do that. But I think just to your point about the apocalypse, what's your word again? The apocalypse optimist?
Apocalyptimist,
Apocalyptimist.
which apocalypse means to reveal. It doesn't mean the end of the world, it just means to reveal what's hidden.
Yeah, and to go to the what most people would imagine as a apocalyptic, then of course, I mean, I'm just watching the shifting sands of moving from a paradigm to a paradigm, an old one to a new one. Whenever there's people who are in a comfort zone that control resources, then of course they're going to resist anything that undermines their position. And um, it definitely feels like there are a handful of people who are in those positions of control. And when you look at the man-made hierarchical structures that we have been dominated by for the last few hundred years, then that is no surprise. And people, the whole notion of being on the treadmill to, keep up with the Joneses, do better, have more, where's all of that coming from? And it's really a programming. If people talk about, sustainability, I'm not interested in sustainability anymore. It's more the regenerating of things to create surplus and extra rather than doing no worse. Sustainable for me is just doing no worse than you're already doing, which is not great. With so much depletion having already happened, with so much destruction already in place, and accelerating, then it's more about how do you become abundant and regenerate things rather than just sustain what's already bad. So that's the first thing. But why are people like that? And I don't believe humanity as a collective are negligent in that way. I mean, if you look at certain African tribes or South American tribes, then they'll live within their means because that's their modus operandi. If you are in colonial countries operating under a centralized banking system with credit and debt, I mean, the Islamic tradition doesn't have the concept of debt and owing money and taking interest. It's the usury fees for being able to use money exist in some cultures and not others. So it definitely feels like there's been a small group of people. I mean, as the mafia would say, you don't need to ever control a village. You just need to control the chief of police, the mayor of the town, and the chief justice. And if you control those, say, three influential people in a larger group, then you control the group. And it feels like that for me with humanity, that there's a handful of people who have been promoting a program that says keep using stuff, keep consuming stuff, um, and distorting the messaging around what the impact of all of that is, such that everybody just merrily goes about their business and does as they're told, so to speak, and thinks nothing more of it. So if I come to some of the technologies that I've been watching emerge, most of them have been held back. And it's probably about January time this year, probably before Christmas even, that I started to see things emerge that had been held back forever. And so one example I'll give you is Nassim Haramein and his sphere resonator, which is the foundation for his concept of moving from A to B without impediment of gravity or resistance, and having infinite energy to be able to, or over unity energy, let's call it, to be able to do all of that and more. And when I look at where he's been and how rubbished he's been over time, and how he's built an audience over time to speak directly to, and now he's setting up the International Space Program in Switzerland. He would have never been allowed to do that if the powers that be, or the handful of people that I'm talking about globally, still held as tight a control as they have in the past, because they've stopped him from doing so many other things, and many other people from doing many other things. And just the fact that that as an organization has been birthed and is actually allowed to have any airplay at all, is allowed to have an audience, is already a massive statement of how the shifting sands are allowing things to come through and emerge that haven't been allowed to before.
And quick question, why do you think that is right now? Is it cosmic timing? Is it a planetary alignment? Is it just more people waking up? Is it a critical mass, or what's
It's
your
all of the
that?
above, isn't it? I mean, it's for people to have a different mindset or a different view is to be introduced to what that even looks like. I mean, Dr. David Martin again was talking to me about the advent of electricity, when electricity was just being discussed as a concept in social circles. Nobody knew what it meant. And then when people started walking into the Savoy Hotel, which was the first building in the world in London to be built as a fully electrified building with electric light and power and so on, then people would walk in and say, "Oh, this is what you mean by electricity," and now we get it. And because we're here with a bunch of other people experiencing the same thing, and we're having a shared experience of it, and now that's landing as an experience in a whole different way than it would have done just for me on my own, or just for me on my own in my own mind. So I think, there's got to be not got to be, but it's a lot easier for collective consciousness to uh, come up to meet where the mindset is at if the mindset itself is shifting. And it's definitely shifting, and there's more and more people getting more and more airplay to be able to express that, to give more weight to that, to add more people to that school of thinking, or being open-minded enough to even consider it. So I think it's many different things, but I mean,
It's really kind of like a critical mass, is what I'm hearing you say, or they call the 100th monkey, where so many are starting to wake up. And I think a part of that, and I know in the regenerative design, we talk a lot about independent media. I mean, a lot of these stories, what we're talking about, you don't hear on corporate media. And I think that's why so many of these platforms and podcast, everyone's a podcaster now, is kind of like really accelerated, this whole mycelial work about connecting up individuals and their knowledge and their insights and perceptions with the technologies and the people who are the innovators and forethinkers and visionary minds of our time. It's like it's a lot easier to connect now, and of course the internet was a part of that, being adapted for that connectivity. But definitely media is playing, even doing this interview and talking with you today is doing a huge part to help move humanity forward, or at least right now the people who have access to technology and to media. And some people get it by just sitting quietly by a creek and listening to the water, or being with a tree. So there's lots of types of intelligence and way that these concepts get communicated. And we here in the West and other places, I know you're in Australia, we tend to use a lot of media to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I talk a lot about the 6 different pillars of society and how the cards are, so basically a stack of cards, and how much effort's been put into maintaining the house of cards, despite the fact that odd cards are now being pulled out and accelerating at a rapid rate. The number of cards are getting pulled out, and the key card yet to be pulled out for the rest to become visible is the media, the big media card. So if we've got, government as one silo, finance, education, big pharma, and all of the health side of stuff, big tech and big media, then those are the main pillars that are absolutely complicit with each other, and would have had to have been complicit with each other for COVID to have even been a thing. So the idea that they're all separate and they all don't speak to each other and they all don't influence each other is a nonsense. I mean, the big pharma trying to roll that, well, if the powers that sit behind all of those trying to push it out of COVID and narrative, without big media being involved, without big pharma being involved, without big tech being involved to censor things and make sure the narrative was the narrative that they wanted to have heard, and without government complicity and involvement, and without the financial incentives to do it all, this all so complicit, and yet none of them will speak to the relationship to the others, and will avoid it like the plague. But they're all so complicit, and the thing that everything's going on in the background, or a lot of things are going on in the background, but so long as the mainstream media is controlling the narrative to the mass majority of the planet, then it will appear as if nothing's going on at all. And as soon as that card gets pulled, then the whole lot comes down. And so, when I'm looking at the shift in paradigm, it's really that shift of aligning with nature is coming through, and naturally evolving, and nothing can stop it in my view. And then all of the previous paradigm is built on man-made structures, which are no longer relevant to that, aligning with a bigger body of wisdom and being nature. But they'll still keep trying until the death, because it means the death of their systems, of course. So, it'll keep escalating, as the new comes through, the old rises to match it. The new just keeps going because it's just naturally that's the way the evolution of consciousness is going anyway. So there's nothing particularly to stop it. It just keeps going, and there's not. I mean, yes, it might need fueling, and there's some of us that would feel it needs more fuel sooner than later, but it'll do its own thing in its own time. And so that's naturally happening, and as that's happening, then all of the power brokers that would want to keep the thing, maintain the status quo, will just keep raising their game until ultimately they can't raise the game anymore, and it'll just all implode, and then we're into the new paradigm, you might say, which for me feels like a 20-year process from, say, 2012 to 2032. I'll just put those dates out there. They don't mean anything, but if we were to say as a 20-year transition phase, then we're more than halfway through, and that's kind of how it feels to me. It feels like the energy that's fueling the old is within any limited system is decaying. I mean, if you're in a limited finite system, then you can only keep expanding and contracting until you use up all of the oxygen or the energy in the system, and then you're gone. Whereas, to be on the Christic spiral on a ever increasing, ever expanding trajectory into future consciousness and aligning with nature is inexhaustible.
Well,
So
it's very, very interesting. Again, not to interrupt, but when you're talking, it very much reminds me verbatim of a lot of the indigenous prophecies that I've studied and researched, and actually, strangely enough, on some level, have lived through. And part of it is, at the Hopi, they talk about the fourth world and the emergence into the fifth world, or in South America, the time of the fifth sun. But it is this place of going from this imbalance of control to nature and the elementals purifying what they call koyaanisqatsi. It's basically the world is out of balance. Um, Humanity is out of balance. Our values are upside down. We're not aligned with nature and nature's intelligence. And then that these elemental forces will start working on uh, the condition and the consciousness and helping the evolution of consciousness through, whether people believe climate change happens naturally, whether human beings are doing it, whether it's connected and symbiotic. But we've seen through countless cycles of human history, 26,000 year cycles, 52,000 year cycles, that there's definitely massive magnetic pole shifting and things that happen on the planet in relationship to, the earth, nature, and the universe that are in some ways really beyond human control. As much as they try, and there's a lot of stuff out now with uh, different types of technologies and frequencies, frequency medicine, frequency warfare, these types of things. But it's fascinating because there really is something going on. And then I know a lot of people, I take it all with a grain of salt. Astrologers, we went from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, the ending of the Mayan calendar. 2012, was it 2012? Is it, what's the actual date? So not to get too overly granularly obsessed, like this is the absolute truth, but nonetheless, all these things are reflecting symptoms and expressions that we're going through this incredible transformation and change towards something new. But within that idea of new, there's also things like I call it ancient futurism. There's also tones and shades and aspects of things that are ancient and things that have worked, things that are eternal and universal. But how do we innovate and express that in a new way? So we have probably about another 5 or 10 minutes left. And I just want to make sure, again, I want to go back to you because any more of your insights. And then I do want to share, I know we've talked a little bit, I wanted to share something about an initiative that we're launching, because right now, again, calling the lions to the round table. And even though people are working on all levels, from their local, from their own personal transformation to their own environment, like a non-toxic living, non-toxic household products, non-toxic cosmetics, if you use them, how to eat more consciously, how to be more regenerative, more green, how to have less of a negative, extractive, or carbon footprint, whatever verbiage people want to use. But we are putting together, actually, we're not even putting together, it's just kind of coming together naturally from the messaging through nature's intelligence of this council of people who want to actually, let's say, put our superpowers together and continue to synergize and accelerate the pace of what's happening on the planet. Because I mean, I will say I'm a journalist. I do lots of due diligence and research. But for most people who, they go up, they wake up, go to work, come home, consume corporate media, have dinner, go to bed, do that five. And again, I'm not demeaning it. I'm just saying a lot of people are, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, they are imprisoned in the Matrix. And then there are those who are trying to escape the Matrix, but also at the same time inspire others for their own evolutionary journey. So in the time that we have left, if there's any other tidbits or insights you can give to our viewers, or any inspiration. And I love that you said regeneration, because sustainability I had a conversation the other day. Sustainability has to become trainability. Like we have to train people, and we have to, like you said, go on. I mean, we've known about sustainability for thousands of years, and then since the whole baby boomer generation and the Earth First movement and Greenpeace and women's rights, human rights, the Back to the Land movement, the explosion of consciousness and music and art and psychedelia and all these things. We've been talking about sustainability, but again, we have to go beyond just sustaining. We have to regenerate, compost what doesn't work, keep what works, and continue to germinate a more positive potential future for humanity. But again, going back to you, any last thoughts or ways that you wanted
Oh,
to?
I think just when you described the sustainable, even regenerative approaches that people might take to having less of a carbon footprint, let's say. I mean, for me, that's just real. Well, it's important and it's a bridging to what's coming. But what's coming, in my view, is entirely different. I mean, if you didn't have to go to work in the first place, if you had replicators that were able to replicate whatever you wanted, so you didn't have to dig anything out of anywhere, and it came directly from the field, both the energy that you use, the things that you consume. I mean, a big focus that we have, or some of the people that I'm dealing with, is all around closing the matter loop and the energy loops. And so the matter loop is, if you can use resonant frequencies to distill out of any waste stream, or not even waste, but out of any given thing, all the constituent elements. So, for example, if you took a lump of coal and you're able to extract out the carbon in it, the silica in it, the trace elements of gold and silver and copper or anything else that might be in there, and you're able to do that with anything, anywhere. And so any given community with such a access to technology would be able to take even the most rudimentary elements before even the waste stream, and build up a library of elements, constituent elements. And with the right kind of technology in 3D printing, then you could use those constituent elements to reconstitute anything that you want, even down to something as relatively technologically advanced as a mobile phone. So, I mean, that's kind of where I think it's going, and I think most of the people who are at the you were mentioning that the collective humanity is at different places along their spiritual evolution. I mean, that's why out of the 50 things we're exploring, then there might be several things within one category, because there's no one size fits all. So if you've got, for example, over Unity devices, you can have, a very complex system with electromagnets and a lot of tech, like Nassim's working with. There's other people who are working with, I think, probably more advanced things, simpler things than even that, which are ridiculously simple, just sacred geometry and magnets, right down to other people who are at the other end of the spectrum, creating machines to replace existing machines that run on ammonia rather than petrol or diesel, and only have two working parts and can be made of pretty much any materials you can find in any local area on the planet. So they're three examples of different layers of complexity in a given solution, be it energy. And I feel that over Unity energy is not just here, it's been around forever. And the most advanced versions thereof are the ones that have been downloaded from ancient traditions, not anything that's new. People promoting them, or not even promoting them, because they're not. I talked to a friend of mine, Kevin, who's I'd say is the custodian of magnetic energy, and he just simply says, well, so long until the collective consciousness makes that shift from self-interest to common good, then there's no point bringing free anything out, because the usual suspects will snaffle it up and just sell it back to everybody else. So there's got to, we're waiting for this. I think the shift has already happened energetically, but we're waiting for it to materially reflect in this dualistic realm, where the shift from self-interest to common good actually lands in a meaningful way to allow the plethora of technologies that are already there, that I've already seen, allow them to come out. It's like energy medicine. We talked about uh, different approaches to resonance technologies and healing. Medicine or healing, health, good health, in my view, in the future is simply being able to read the frequencies of your entire physiology, emotional makeup, energetic makeup, and map it against the optimum and be able to figure out what's plus or minus 5% in or out of resonance for where it should be. And wherever it's out of resonance, simply play back the signal or the frequency that it would need to reharmonize again.
Yeah,
So
very interesting. One of my friends, Aaron Bigelow, um, from California, he was the developer of Amp Coil, and they're doing a lot of the same thing with like bio resonance, where you can basically talk into a computer and it analyzes the different wavelengths and frequencies of your voice and how that gets expressed. And then they're using actually magnetics and certain frequencies to help bring organs and different pathways, adrenal glands, pineals, pituitaries, all these things back into resonance. And they've had a lot of success actually over like treating Lyme's disease and other things that have been um, typically uncurable. So it's definitely exciting, and I do think I know a lot of people who are kind of anti-technology, but I think inevitably, technology again in this full spectrum mandala of regenerative solutions and full spectrum design, that technology definitely has its place. I wanted to share with you just really quick for a moment here, because part of what we're doing right now, and this is kind of where I'm committing a lot of my time and energy to, we're putting together an international council. And the idea is that, we're not looking for hundreds of people or thousands of people. We're looking for people right now who have a network, and they have a demographic of certain people who are actually doing things very boots on the ground, very deployable, but have regenerative solutions. And that can be anything, again, from technology to health and wellness to food and water remediation security, to media, to new models in economics, governance, and really what I call full spectrum design. But we've been sitting on it for a while, but it's kind of like the same thing. You can't really launch something until the human condition is ready to acknowledge, see it, and ingest it. But it's been great talking with you, because as we talk, you obviously have a wide breadth of knowledge and insight, and we didn't really get into it, but you have a lot of people, Earth Ledger and other people, that are really bringing some very exciting potential alternatives and solutions to the forefront right now. So I just wanted to share that briefly, because through this council, which is really focused on regeneration, education, innovation, and also, we don't talk a lot about it, but conservation. Even during the pandemic, we found out that without people continuing to damage and destroy and extract and just consume and all these types of things that have negative impact, that actually we saw over those couple of years that the planet started to actually regenerate itself. Wildlife was coming back, fish populations, things like coral reefs, water quality. But so I just wanted to share this with you as a little tidbit right now, because it is something we're going to be launching through the Earthstock Eco Spiritual Summit in August. And then the other aspect of that is what we're doing with a platform called Regenerative Media TV, which will be a platform. Everyone loves to go to YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and social media. But right now, to have a platform where there's not just content, but there's also people putting out media, but also curriculums, and people can access consultants, contractors, and products, so that they can become their own regenerator, and not just counting on someone else to do it, or the government's going to come in and fix it. FEMA's going to fly in on a white horse and just fix everything, or that we've given that power to other people. So I just wanted to share that because we feel really inspired and encouraged right now, especially meeting people like yourself, that, if we could get the right, and I'm just throwing this number off the top of my head, let's say there's what, 7 continents, other locations. If we could get the right 30, 40, 50 people together who are really, and it's funny because someone says, oh, it sounds like the regenerative United Nations. And United Nations carries its own history and verbiage and frequency and history and agendas and all these things. But in a way, it's like, yeah, if we could find a group of innovators and regenerators and forward thinkers, and again, we're not talking hundreds or thousands of people to come together at this time and to strategize, to collaborate and co-create together, and at the same time putting out information uh, to the mass public and connecting them with the solutions, that maybe that could have some sort of possible effect. So again, I wanted to share that, and I think we have just a minute or two. So again, I want to go back. Any last thoughts? And I'd love to maybe even do this again because I know there's other things we haven't talked about, but just for the sake of time and bandwidth and people in their busy lives and attention spans and all the things that command our energies at this time of human history. Any words or thoughts of wisdom or inspiration for our viewers as we go through this time of regenesis, of recreation, as we're looking at new Earth, new humanity, new design, new paradigm? Anything you'd like to offer?
Well, I think it's just a matter of as divine right timing is always key, and it feels like the energy's already shifted, and we're just waiting for the impact of that to be felt in the material world. So it's not an if, it's only a when, in my view. And I've seen all of the technologies that, well, not all of the technologies, of course, there be many more, but I've seen representatives in each area of technology and systems that would allow this existence to be entirely different. Um, and in a way that nobody can really imagine, because I mean, everybody, would consider, oh, well, I'll just get up and I'll do a different kind of a job that I might enjoy more. What happens if you didn't have to do any job? What happens if you were able to express yourself in whatever way? And people, get frightened by that and say, well, then that's my purpose gone, or people will bludge on the system and take advantage of it. And all of those things are true. And it's not something that's going to change overnight. The thing that I like about Claire W. Graves' work of the last century was this notion of a pendulum that um, keeps going, moving from more of a self-interest to common good approach to existence, and it keeps speeding up, speeding up, speeding up, speeding up. So, when I was mentioning a 20-year timeline horizon earlier on, the previous timeline to that was 300 years. The previous timeline to that was, say, 1,000 years. Before that, 10,000 years. Before that, 50,000 years. Even 300 years, there isn't a generational, well, that moves beyond the generational gap. So within our generation, nobody can remember what it was like 300 years ago, for example, and what existed 300 years ago and how it operated, and whether it was a matriarchal or a patriarchal led society, let alone 1,000 years ago or several thousand years ago or whatever else. So I think, this, and after this timeline horizon of a shift, the next one might only be 2 years before the next shift. So things are definitely speeding up, not necessarily in terms of our daily lives, although it feels like that as well, but certainly in terms of the degree of displacement between opposing views. Opposing views, I think this is the last bastion of extremes and opposites, and we're coming into a phase of more merging of matriarchal, patriarchal leadership and understanding and spirituality coming in to meet up with science. So we're coming into a different era, which nobody's ever been to before, can't remember the history, couldn't remember far enough back of when it could have ever been any different to what it appears to be today. but it's absolutely shifting, and it's coming like a freight train, and it's basically here, and we're just waiting for material world to catch up with energetic world. So it's not far away, and I've seen a lot of stuff that contributes to that. Very happy to talk more about it at some other occasion, because there's just, we should just take one category and explore the 10 things in each category, of which there are 10 categories. So it's not a short conversation, but just to
Well,
give just to give
absolutely
a
not.
sense, just to
Well,
give
I
a
will.
sense there's a hope, that it's all sitting there. People talk about med beds as if they're, an alien kind of a concept, whereas the pieces of what make up resonance healing, you've just mentioned one. I know Sonophie, another one. So there's plenty of people playing that game, and they're already here with it. It's just, to what degree will it be allowed out into the mainstream if mainstream is still narrated and controlled by the media and the big pharma? So it's there, it's waiting. It's just a matter of the critical mass shift.
Absolutely. And I think part of it too, I know for me, it's like as a logistics mind mapping person too, I think part of the discussion of this council is could be like aggregating uh not just the information, but also like the people, and kind of like mind mapping and tracking some of this in a way, because a lot of the people that are bringing these solutions are so focused on their solution that they're doing their part. So again, in the effort of being a visioneer, a regenerator, a bridge builder, an architect, mind map design person, I'm actually, I'll just say, with no agenda or expectations, I'm really intrigued about our connection and the potential of um, putting a lot of this together, just to, because once people actually hear, I mean, most people can't do deep dives and don't know really what's happening. But if we get to the point of where we can be um, connecting with a community of people who are eager and hungry to know what is at the cutting edge of innovation and what is available and what's real, again, it can inspire people, but can also help. It is kind of like the morphic field, or the energetic field. It can start to um,
Radiate out.
accelerate and expand on itself too. So that's why, I don't want to be down in the weeds dealing with the day-to-day traumas of individuals and their evolution of consciousness process, which is valid, and a lot of people are really good at that. But I'm kind of, I'm looking at how do we start to change, how do we inspire people, how do we start to get these solutions deployed, and also how do we start to not just accelerate, but start to um, really bring into manifestation and actualization some of these things that, again, most people have no idea about. But anyways, we'll talk more about that. It's just I'm trying to get more focused, like a laser. Like, okay, I can do 100 things, but what would be the most effective? Because I've kind of
Yeah.
gotten lazier as the years go on. It's like, how can I do more by doing less? And what do I need to focus on? So I just want to let everyone know we've been talking with Steve Haggart today, and he's in Australia, and it's been a real honor. Your history, your background, I mean, your connection to Dominator, which people know already around the world, and your um, perspective is very unique and refreshing. So thank you for your time, and we will continue a discourse at another date. But I really appreciate being a visionaire and a regenerator and an architect together. So
Well,
thanks for.
and all of us together, because I mean, I'm nothing special. You're doing some incredible work. Other people are doing amazing work around the world, so we just need to get them all together, like you say.
There you go. All right, we're on it, starting right now.
All right. Yeah.
Well,
Here we go.
aggregating our decades of accumulative efforts is, we didn't just have an epiphany this morning and bumped into each other. So,
Oh,
anyways,
no.
thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your weekend, and for your family there. And we'd really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll continue our evolution of consciousness journey. So, thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.